All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our second monthly Lake Org chat. Our goal with these is to provide educational resources and support to the broader community in regard to lake health. As you know, Wisconsin is home to over 15,000 lakes, and over 750 of these lakes have an organization that exists to protect and manage the health of the lake for current and future generations. All of these organizations are at a different place when it comes to organizational capacity, and all of them need different levels of support. We try to get information out in a variety of ways, and this year in 2025, we are recording these monthly Lake Org chats to get this information out to you in a fun and engaging way. Not all of these recordings will be relevant to everyone, and that's okay. We'll be rolling out new topics each month, and we hope you'll join us for future episodes. Tentative topics are listed here. And you'll be able to find all of these recordings on the Extension Lakes YouTube channel. In this episode, we'll be discussing how to use electronic communications, mainly email, effectively. My name is Sarah Winju. I'm the Leadership and Capacity Development Specialist for the Extension Lakes program at UW-Stevens Point, and I'll be helping to facilitate these chats each month.
And I'm Eric Olson. I'm the Director of Extension Lakes. I'm going to also help facilitate these conversations. And each month we're going to try and bring on some different faces, some new guests to add light to the topic that we're discussing. And this month we're joined by someone who's really helped guide our capacity work over the last 3 years, Dave, as well as a subject matter expert, Chelsea Rademacher. Dave, could you please introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Eric. I'm honored to represent Sand Lake Association and its members. Our lake is in both Rusk and Chippewa counties, and I'm a proud graduate of the Lake Leaders Institute crew number 15, and like Eric mentioned, a member of the capacity committee. Chelsea?
Thank you all for inviting me today. And hello, everybody. My name is Chelsea Rademacher. I have a background in communications and journalism, which I am currently using at UW-Madison's Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies as their communications manager, where I'm in charge of running all communications efforts from our alumni magazine to event promotion to social media, which hopefully some of you have come across.
All right. Well, we are doing a whole episode on email because we all use it frequently. And there are a lot of questions that we receive regarding email. And these are just a few of the questions that we get. We'll be addressing these questions and more in this episode. So stick with us. And if you have additional questions that aren't addressed, please be sure to complete the feedback survey linked in YouTube and let us know.
And this slide is really just meant to highlight some basic facts about emails that we're all facing. Emails are not going away anytime soon. In fact, they keep growing year after year in terms of how many emails are sent. This bar chart shows you that we're pretty much anticipating to get into the 400 billion emails per day numbers coming up. So it's a lot of communications going on out there. Email is basically going to be part of our life. And we really think that lake organizations can and should be using email more effectively to communicate specifically to their members or to the people within a lake district to make sure that they're keeping them up to date on what's going on. We're hoping that today's conversation is probably geared mostly towards maybe a secretary of a lake association or a lake district, or anybody who's in charge of their communications that they send out to large groups of people. We'll go to the next slide. If you're like me, you have a bit of a love-hate relationship with email. You kind of need it to function in society. I feel like I probably have 3 different email accounts. I know my work inbox, because I don't really delete things, has something like 60,000 messages in it. This medium is a lot like snail mail, right? Like, except we don't spend as much time typing letters to each other anymore, signing things, putting them in envelopes. Instead, we're using email, and it's really easy to use. But there's some actual similarities between the two in terms of how you want to use them to communicate. And in fact, you can have sort of a good approach to using email And unfortunately, you can have a bad approach, or you could be making mistakes, and you might not even know they're mistakes. We're going to be talking about some of those maybe things that are tripping you up, and maybe they're just things that are preventing your email from getting to the people you want them to get to. We're also trying to recognize that you're probably running on a very thin budget, and you're probably running with volunteers. That it's not that you have a full-time staff person working for your organization doing email communications, but instead a volunteer. So we have to recognize that there's going to be limits to what anyone can do using some of the tips and techniques that we're talking about here. Please just don't let the perfect become the enemy of the good. Okay. Always just strive to do a little bit better each time you compose an email and send it out, and bear in mind that these things can actually have results. You might actually find that people enjoy getting your emails as you use some of these tips. I don't know.
just curious, I love email. Does everyone love email on this call?
I love email, and I love talking about email.
I do like email. I don't know if I love it, but I do like it.
I like email, but here's what I'm getting a little bit overwhelmed, because there's all these other communication channels that are also like email, but they're not email. So I've got, text messages coming in, and I've got Facebook group chats happening, and then I get in, and it just seems like it's almost overwhelming sometimes. So many different ways to communicate. Maybe email feels almost like it's quaint, like it's old timey.
Wow, we should write that down and date it. That's a pretty profound statement.
That's awesome.
All right, let's go on to the next slide.
So what we want to do is bring in a kind of a reason for having Chelsea here as a guest, is that she is a subject matter expert. She does manage communications for a relatively large organization, sending out a lot of different emails. And we wanted to get a feel for, like, how do we even just think about the messages that we're sending? How are we kind of managing our workflow, if you want to call it that? How are we making sure that email doesn't control us, but that we control the emails that we're sending out? So Chelsea, tell us again a little bit more about what you actually do for a living.
Sure. I mean, and if you had told me that I was going to make my living sending emails, I would not have believed you. But that is kind of what I do. So again, I'm with the Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies. We're one of the academic units down here in Madison, with a variety of research centers, undergrad, graduate programs. We have a growing and passionate alumni base. So we have, just from that, you can tell we have a huge, vast array of audiences that we need to reach, all who need different messages at different times through different media. But the majority of what we do is through email form. We have all of our event announcements, RSVPs, then those event confirmations, thank you messages that go out through email. We have our publications that are all run digitally. We don't do any print publications anymore. So we have a monthly alumni magazine, which some of you may get and hopefully may read. We have a bi-weekly student newsletter for all of our grads and undergrads. We have a monthly newsletter for our faculty and staff. That's kind of more internal. Here's what you need to know as an employee. We actually only direct mail one thing a year, and that's our holiday card, which goes to a very small audience. I believe it's less than 500. Everything else is digital. And as we've been talking about, using email to your advantage and not letting email rule you. One thing that we think about is our emails in connection to the bigger picture of what we're saying. And we think about that in terms of our social media accounts, anything that's events that are happening. So we want to make sure that all of the things that we're doing talk to each other. And I'm sure that this is something that you guys can draw parallels to with your organizations as well. If you're communicating that, there's an important vote for something coming up and a meeting coming up and the annual picnic and all these things are happening in the same space. We want to make sure that the audience that you're trying to reach gets those messages in a meaningful way and they don't get overwhelmed. Because when people get overwhelmed by information, it's just as easy to tune out. I don't know if anyone on this call has had the experience where you don't check your inbox for a few days and then you finally do and you have like 70 emails and you just like mass delete everything. You're like, you know what? I do not have the time for all these promotions. That's what we don't want to happen to your emails. So that's what we're going to try and give you some tips to help avoid that kind of email fatigue. I love the question of what are we communicating and how often? We'll often get requests to start up newsletters that are biannual or quarterly. And that's something that we say that is an eon in the digital space. Monthly is great. Bi-weekly is awesome. And if you've got the content, weekly is great. Again, this takes a lot of build up on the front end to get these things established. But if you are looking to like really get your name established in someone's inbox, you do have to be doing it relatively frequently. I certainly would not send anything more like multiple things per day. But you could, depending on what you have, it's not unreasonable that we'll send 2 really large emails from the Nelson Institute in 1 week. So to make sure that all of this works well together, we have a content calendar, and we've established this in Outlook just because that's what all of us staff members use. It's open to anyone in the Institute to add things to, and we use this to track all of our emails, all of our social media posts, all of our events. We also have in here university-wide events like spring break. So we're not going to send out a student newsletter during spring break when the kids aren't checking their email because they're too busy doing what students do on spring break. We also have important holidays in there. We definitely don't want to send an email on the first day of Hanukkah, things like that. So we try to get the full picture of not just what's happening with the Nelson Institute, but what's happening statewide, globally, that we want to kind of plug into. Along those lines, that also helps us think about what types of content we want to include in our publications, in our magazines, in our newsletters. So here you can see an example. This is our undergraduate newsletter, which is called Field Notes. And we have what we call an editorial calendar for this. We know that every issue is going to have a student feature. We're going to include several deadlines and reminders, and we're going to include up to 5 events. We're in the business of teaching students and getting them jobs. So we have a career corner where they can get specific career resources tailored to their education, and then just a fun fact. So we have created these content buckets in this newsletter, which allows us to plan out, we can go a full year in advance. Typically we're working, 4 to 5 issues in advance for this particular one. But this is something that can be really applicable for anything that you're doing. If you know that summer is going to come up every year and you have an annual party every year, you can plan ahead that you're going to need to communicate about that. And then it might be February and you're like, wow, nothing's going on. I've got some time. Well, I could make that summer message now. That kind of helps build capacity within your own workflow. So you're not feeling like you're always behind the 8 ball. Which I've definitely felt that way before. So planning out like this, it really helps. It can take a lot of work at the beginning, but really pays off in the long run. Some of these things that we have, they've become so cut and paste, which makes it really easy on our end and really beneficial for our audience because they're getting exactly what they want when they need it in a timely manner.
So I just want to jump in. So this is just a spreadsheet, just an easy to use Excel spreadsheet, or you could use a table where you add content and you can then see the whole year. You could see month to month. You could cut, copy, paste. And so it's all just there for others to look at too. So you could share it with others and everyone can contribute.
Yep.
Yeah, we love Google Drive. That works really well for our team. There's all sorts of platforms. Google did not pay me to be here, but we do love Google Drive. So this is just a sheet that we have that's shared out, not just with members of our team, but folks who are working in communications across the Institute at our research centers, so they can see, oh, they're going to publish a story on one of our students. So we might want to add that to our social media calendar.
Yep. And for a small association like Sand Lake, we are building, because we have that repetitive stuff, we are building our content earlier now, and we're doing that as a board. We have a small board of 4 members. So we do a lot of work, and we handhold each other when we need to get this content built. So this is helping us understand, okay, we know we do our boat parade on July 4th, and we know when our annual meetings are and things like that. But now we're collaborating together to build that content.
Yeah, and that's actually a good lead into the next slide, where I try to show that annual cycle that a lake organization might go through. Yes, we're all moving towards a destination, healthier lakes, restored lakes, whatever that is. So we are moving through time, but there's also a wheel that's spinning that comes back year after year. it's January, it's February, it's March. And I think with lakes, it's kind of cool because there's also just seasonality to the types of things you might be talking about and experiencing. You're communicating usually to people who are on a lake. They could be at a cabin, they could be just visitors. And so let's use that seasonality to try to stylize or inform what we're going to be talking about. It doesn't make sense to talk about ice safety in July or your Fourth of July boat parade in August. You've got to kind of figure this all out and map out a schedule. But the nice thing, Dave, that you mentioned is like, then it just sort of repeats itself. And I wonder, Chelsea, do you guys find that too? Like that your schedule from say 2024 to 2025, some of this looks the same. I mean, you're on a campus, and so there's always like semester timelines and all sorts of things that are really similar from year to year.
Yeah, absolutely. And even with things like, our dean will include a letter in each magazine, and those can get pretty cyclical year to year because, we're welcoming back students in January and September. And then in March, we're getting ready for Earth Fest coming up. And then over summer, it's a little quieter. So we do kind of more reflective things. So that has helped, other folks too just kind of think about what do I need to say? What am I going to talk about? And then look back, okay, last year I said this, so I don't want to say the exact same thing, but maybe they won't remember what I said 2 years ago. And then boom, you've already got copy written.
And I think a good thing to do is to be able to have some process to hand off maybe the wheel from one person to another as well. Once this plan sort of gets established, you're not as worried about like, oh, that one person who knew everything about how we're doing this, if they go away, what do we do? It's like, no, we have something of a plan already, or at least we even have like last year's record of all these communications. In this example too, I try to key it to the annual meeting. That's something that's important both for lake associations and lake districts to think about. Lake districts definitely have to think about it because there are some real specific communications they have to do to post a notice for their annual meeting. In lake associations, it's really about like, how do you make sure you get as much involvement or participation in your annual meeting? And this wheel is meant to show it kind of working backwards from the annual meeting. You've got to maybe recruit some volunteers to help out with the annual meeting. And you've got to remind people that they need to renew their membership before the annual meeting. So there's a bit of a logic to that as well. And for you, any lake organization might have to change this. I'm not going to assume that everybody has their annual meeting in May, but you can just modify it and then start adapting it to your specific needs. What we want to do though is also, this is like having a plan. That's great for your communications, as Chelsea was saying, maybe monthly at least, maybe even more than monthly, depending on what's going on. Now we got to get into like, well, but what's in the meat of these emails? How are we actually following some best practices or some guidance? What if, now that people have been using email for decades, what have we learned about it?
We have learned so much about email. There are people who research email habits, and it is fascinating stuff. And so we really know exactly what we need to do in order to not just get your email into the right inbox and opened and read, but make it valuable for the person who's getting it. So on this slide is somewhat of a checklist of what I use every time I'm pulling together something to make sure that my emails are going to be read, they're going to provide value. The first thing is to have a look or some level of branding. We do that. All of our emails come from the Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies. That helps get a consistent name in the inbox of the people you're trying to reach. So depending on your constituency, this might be you as an individual. It might be an organizational email. It just kind of depends on your organization and your community, what's going to work best. If you're someone that everybody knows and you've been there forever and seeing your name, they're like, oh yeah, I know that person. It might work really well to have the emails come from you. If you have like maybe a larger organization or it changes hands frequently, you might want to consider creating an organizational email, lakeorg@gmail.com. And then have that become the thing that becomes consistent and recognized. We know from data, and also just think about your own habits, people are going to delete unrecognized senders right away because either you think it's spam, you think it's a phishing attempt, or you just don't care. So if you don't recognize that name, the chances are it's going to get deleted. I love having, you know, an organizational account over an individual because it's free, it's easy to make. You can share that password. You can have multiple people have access to that account. I've done some volunteer work with other organizations, and we would create, you know, one Gmail for the big event that we would host every year. So then anyone who was working on planning that event could get in there and file stuff away. It makes it really easy, and the collaboration and the transfer very simple. Second thing that I think about is subject line. So I mentioned that I come from communications and journalism, and so it hurts my heart to say that people actually are less likely to open the fun, cute, and clever subject lines that you spend hours agonizing over. They are more likely to open the email if it says exactly what is in the email itself. So you want 6 words, no more. If there's an action and a date involved in your message, include that in the subject line itself. So something cute might be bring your baskets. We'll see you at the picnic. People are going to be like, yeah, whatever, what picnic? I don't care. But if you have RSVP for the annual picnic by March 13th, it's, okay, this is an action item I need to take. I know what event we're talking about. I know something is required of me, and I know it's required of this date. So as you're crafting your subject lines, try to keep it to the point and not cute. So for this one, you can see, this was a publication that we do, and it was part 2 of two pieces. So we have our sender, Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies, part 2, renewable and alternative energy in Wisconsin. This publication is a little bit different than the example I verbally gave, but you can kind of get the idea. And then the second piece is preview text, and this is only going to be applicable for those of you who are using an email platform like a MailChimp or a Constant Contact. If you're sending one-to-one from your personal Gmail, preview text is not an option that you have. But if you are using an email client, this pulls in the first thing that you see under the subject line in your inbox. If you don't fill this out, it will automatically pull in the first, 10 words from the email, which could be, hey, Joe, it's Chelsea. How are you doing? Which, all great if it's a personal letter, but in something like this example that you're seeing on the screen, we wanted to tell everyone that you open this, you're going to read about solar, you're going to read about nuclear, and learn more about what's happening in the state of Wisconsin. So if you have the option to use that preview text, do use it. It is very important in getting people to actually click and read your email. And okay, so if you were like, what, people study email habits? That's crazy. You might think this is even crazier. There are laws and regulations about how emails can be used. It's called the Can-Spam Act. This is something that gets batted around colloquially in the field. I believe it was introduced in 2003. So it's, what year is it? It's 20 plus years old. And this basically regulates who can use email and for what purpose. So if you are using an organizational email, right? Nelson at wisc.edu versus Chelsea at wisc.edu, you're legally required to do several things. You have to have an unsubscribe option. And then if people unsubscribe, you legally have to actually unsubscribe them. You can't just be like, well, they clicked it. You have to actually take them off your list. So if you're using a platform like MailChimp, Constant Contact, Emma, etc., you're legally required to include this, but those platforms put it in there for you. So you can't take it out, which means you don't have to worry about it. It's already there. If you're using a personal Gmail account, I would recommend adding something in your signature or footer line that says, don't want to receive this, let me know. It could be a link to a form. It could just be a, reply and say unsubscribe. But anything that you're doing that is, promotional marketing, not a one-to-one letter of, hey, been a long time since we've seen each other, let's catch up. Anything that's like that marketing promotional has to include an unsubscribe link. It's also recommended that you do include a physical mailing address. If you have one, even if it's a PO box, it just kind of gives some more credibility. It's not a requirement in Can-Spam, but it's a recommendation. Let's see. I think I scrolled a little bit too quick. Let me go back up. Oh yeah, this, so I had said anything that's promotional, anything that's commercial. So if you have a newsletter, that counts. That falls under Can-Spam. If you're asking for donations for your organization, that falls under can spam. Membership drives, anything like that. Anything that's transactional does not, like, here's your receipt, thanks for paying your dues, not subject to can spam. Are you likely to get audited? Probably not. But good things to be aware of and keep in mind. And another check in the reasons to think about having an organizational email account category.
Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit later about kind of deliverability of emails and whether they actually make it to their inbox. And all these tips would actually help maximize the odds that they do make it through spam filters. There isn't some guy named Gary sorting through emails trying to determine which one's spam. This is all computer driven, and they're scanning basically your messages to see if you've complied with these things. So I think, Chelsea, that's why you're recommending, even if you're just using Gmail, try to include some of these basic things, because it'll maximize the chance that it actually gets to an inbox and doesn't get bounced back or filtered, sent into a spam filter.
Absolutely. And thinking about that, automated kicking to spam process, there are a handful of things that you can look for to make sure you're not doing so that you don't get tripped up in those spam filters, which falls really nicely into accessibility, which is a very important thing in the digital space. This is making sure that anything that's online, whether it's on your computer or on your phone, is accessible to all people, whether that's people who have, chronic migraine or vertigo, or people who are vision impaired or hearing impaired. This digital space is, a lot of work has been done, especially just in recent years, to make it accessible. So it truly is an open source platform for everybody. And handily, these accessibility considerations keep you out of spam filters. Why? Because it makes it seem more human, which is the goal in all of these communications. So one thing that will get you kicked into a spam filter is including a ton of images. The computer Gary, who's filtering through everything, sees a bunch of images and goes, that probably isn't a person, that's going into spam or promotions. Likewise, if you have one really huge picture in your email or one really huge PDF attached to your email with minimal text in the email, you're more likely to get kicked into a spam filter. I know it's become very common for digital newsletters to take the form of PDF attachments. At Nelson, that's actually something that we've worked to phase out. We used to do that for our student newsletter, and because of accessibility concerns, that's one reason we decided to ixnay that. But then also we get some more statistics from readership, which we'll get into more later. But if you're like, but my newsletter is a PDF, how am I going to get this information to my people? You can actually just include the information as text in the email. There is research showing that that doesn't create a barrier. In fact, having an attachment or a click to read the full PDF may create more of a barrier to engagement than just putting the information in the email itself. Think about your own habits. You open an email, you're going to do a quick scroll through, see what your eye catches, and then move on. If it's a big attachment or read the full issue, you might go, oh, okay, I'll get around to it later. And then 3 years later, you're like, oh, look at this thing in my inbox. I completely forgot about that. So something to think about that will boost accessibility, but also boost reader engagement. Another thing about PDFs that we don't love is that in addition to triggering spam filters, you can get hit with storage limits. So if you've ever sent an email and gotten the message like this email was too big to send, or not gotten something because your Gmail client says you're out of space, those big attachments take up a lot of space. And the more people use them, the less space you have. And then a last reason is that PDFs, depending on the connectivity of the recipient, can take a really long time to load. And we know that people will wait less than 3 seconds, 1, 2, 3, for something to load before moving on. That doesn't just apply to email, that's web browsing too. So if you're online shopping and you're like trying to buy the whatever and it's taking forever to load, you might jump to a different website to see if it loads faster to buy that same thing. So again, thinking about putting the email just as text, couple pictures, that's great. That can make it really accessible. That can avoid spam filters. To that end, if you are going to start including just a lot of text in an email, you want to format it in a way that is easily readable. and easily accessible. So use headings. Make your section headers bold, larger font, break things up into small paragraphs, use bullet point lists. That's going to help guide the eye to where you want it to go as people are doing that quick skim through. Think about the capital letter F. So if you look at that second to last bullet point format, that is the pattern that the eye reads in an email. And we know this from some really cool research using like heat maps to see where do people spend time on the screen. We're going to give the most attention to that first line. We're going to read all the way across it, jump down to the next thing that sticks out and read a little bit, and then our interest trails off. So as you're formatting your newsletter or your email, that's a handy tip that you can think of. And speaking of formatting, on the next slide, you will see some really great examples. I refer to these often. There is actually a book about email, which feels like meta and a little contradictory. It's a physical book about email, but I highly recommend it. It's called Mailed It. And they have also created some free resources that anyone can use. So these are their two examples for a single action email and a newsletter. So you can see it's really stripped down from what you might be thinking of as an email newsletter. Following the letter F, they have the, it's time for you to do this action. We're jumping to the next thing, the do this action button, and then down to the bottom. Another thing that Mailed It has, and I believe we have all of these resources available for anyone who's watching. They've also got a GPT. So if you are super into AI, or if you're like, maybe I should try this AI thing, this Mailed It GPT is the first AI that I ever tried, and it was what got me hooked on it. You can put in what you need to say, and they will spit it out in a way that is going to get people to read your email. It's incredible. I love it. I'm obsessed with it. I tell everyone that I meet about it. And again, we'll share that link with you if that's of interest.
Yeah, just real quick, we had a winter project like we do almost every single year to do fish rehab and things on the lake during the winter time. We were meeting, Chelsea talked about this cool AI thing. I'm totally into tech. So I'm like, I'm going to try it for our next email. And it made the formatting of my email so much more readable and easy to understand and look at. I was just like, and I told this to Chelsea, I am 100% sold. I'm sending everything through that before I send it out. It's awesome.
Nice.
Especially
we
if you're
like
working.
technology too, as far as things that can help us compose and send these emails out. On the next slide, we kind of just highlight some of the different services that are out there. Some of these range from, maybe they're free to start with, sort of like a freemium edition where they want to get you hooked on their service. And then as you increase your use, they start to show you like, okay, now you've used up all your free stuff. We're going to start charging you. Some of them you just go into it and there's like a sliding scale charting system. But these are basically some of your bulk mail services. And Dave, I think you had said you are using MailChimp. Is that right?
Yeah, yep. So when we decided to move to electronic communication, we were just using Outlook, which was fine. But as Chelsea's already noted, there's a lot of things about that you've got to worry about, and making sure that they can unsubscribe and all those tips that were mentioned earlier. So we decided to try the free version of MailChimp. And as noted, it puts that footer in to unsubscribe. It puts your address in so that you are playing by the rules, right, and the laws when you're sending this stuff out. We do have our own domain, and we have email@sandlakewi.com, which is where all of our email comes from, no matter who it's to, unless it's a one-on-one thing. If it's to members or a broad audience, it always comes from email@sandlakewi.com. Our membership, we went over our free version actually this winter. And so there's a lot of things you don't get on the free version. There's a lot of things that they're offering you on the free version. We'll walk through some of the stuff you don't get, and that a lot of that focuses around the reporting, which is super helpful. And I know Chelsea is going to chime in on that also.
And a lot of these platforms will set you up basically with some templates too, so that you're not starting with just a total blank screen. Instead, they can actually walk you through what is the communication that you're trying to send and give you some helpful tips. The other ones that are mentioned up here, Constant Contact and Emma, here on campus, Extension Lakes use Constant Contact for a number of years. We have some fairly large lists, and so it allowed us to manage those and keep them organized. When you start dealing with different types of lists, Dave, you kind of mentioned this, like maybe there's just a list of members, but maybe there's even a broader list of all of our different supporters. You can start identifying those specific audiences that you're trying to send messages to. These help you to organize them. There's no way to sort of advocate for one over the other. Everybody's experience, I think, is going to vary in terms of what they get into on these. So we just encourage you to check them out and maybe read some online information that compares the different platforms. I would also just say you're right, though, too. Once you get into like the paid platforms, more and more resources become available to you, more and more tools for making it look effective. And then kind of at the other end of the spectrum, you can still, as Dave was mentioning, kept saying Outlook. Outlook is Microsoft's version. Gmail is out there. Apple has its own email system. You can use those. You're just going to bump into like just limits as far as how effective they are, and you're definitely not going to see some of the reporting stuff that we're going to talk about in a little bit. Yeah, and often if you're a lake association just getting started with those things, there's a nonprofit discount. In fact, some of these services, MailChimp and Constant Contact and Emma, might have nonprofit discounts as well.
And I know that MailChimp is, I don't have experience with the other two. I've used MailChimp, and I do know that they have like a kind of a sliding scale. So if you're a super small organization, maybe you only have like, I don't know, 10, 20 people that you're emailing, that's going to be a free account for you because it's based on the number of people that you're emailing and the number of emails you're sending. So if you're thinking, well, we're really small, like we probably don't qualify for this, or that's not for us, like it may actually be kind of the perfect thing for you because you might not have to pay anything.
Yeah. And that's how we started. And we ran into, because we were sending out quite a few emails around our project, we went over the free limit. And for us, that was 1,000 emails in a 1 month period. We have 125 subscribers. And it's kind of scary to think about how fast you get to 1,000, right? But we had a very active email month that month. Normally ours are not. We're paying very little for even the paid version because we only have 125 contacts, and normally we don't go above that 1,000 emails. Now we have the option of going above, and they do, like Chelsea mentioned, they do have a sliding scale. So the more you send, we're at that basic $13 level. But if we needed to jump, it'll automatically do it, and then it'll lower you back down if it's not a normal month or a normal cycle for your email.
And Dave, I think this email text on the screen, I think this is what you had run through that Mailed It GPT. Is that right?
This is one I did.
Oh, that's right.
We just sort of like made up a little meeting here and a simple agenda, but it sort of spit it out and formatted it, included sort of a calendar icon and the location. Those are just neat things that you might be thinking like, how am I going to do these? You might be surprised that the computers can do these things for you. So we've hinted at a couple of times these reporting features that can come out of emails. And this is kind of, it maybe sounds a little geeky, but this is really cool information. Chelsea, you're probably familiar with these reports too. Can you talk through some of what we're looking at here on this screen?
Yeah, and geeky all in 100%. My favorite thing. This is for me the biggest reason to invest in an email service because you have data on what is working and what is not working. You don't have to do the guessing game of why did no one show up to that meeting? Did they not get the email? You'll know exactly how many people opened the email. You'll know who opened the email. You'll know of who opened the email, who clicked on it. And this gives you really great information as you're building out your communications to see what's working and what's not. There's 4 main metrics that we look at when we're looking at success of an email. The first is open rate. So that's how many people opened it from your send list. This is an actual email from Dave. And we want to see an open rate in any email, typically that's above 20%. So good job, Dave. 21.6. So that's of the send list, the people that opened it. There's also your click rate. If you have an email, well, let me say first what click rate is of the people who get your email, how many of them click on the stuff in your email. So think about the types of emails you might be sending, and that may determine how you look at this click rate. For example, if you are sending an email that has one action item, right? Like, hey, everybody, here's the notice, the meeting's coming up next week. That might not have anything to click on. So then you might have a really low click rate, and that's fine. If you're sending something that's like, hey, everyone, register for the boat parade, click here, and it has a really low click rate, then it's like, ooh, but we really wanted people to click on that. That's not a good sign. And then you could think about, okay, maybe we need to send another email. Maybe we need to do a social media post. Maybe I need to go door to door and with my clipboard. But typically we want to see a click rate that's no lower than 2%. I like to see around 5%. So again, good job, Dave, 5.6%. And then the last two things that you'll see here are the bounce rate and the unsubscribe rate. And these are what I call your list health. The bounce rate is how many emails bounced back, whether it was because you typed the email in wrong, we all do it, because that person's inbox was full and it couldn't be delivered, or because someone gave you a fake email at a sign-in to get 5% off, whatever, we've all done it. But as you can see, Dave's list has 0% bounce rate, so his list is perfectly healthy. Everyone that's on there is a real person who actually wants to be getting that stuff, because we have a 0% unsubscribe rate, which is also what we want to see. If you do move into an email client or you start up a newsletter that you haven't done before, it's not unlikely that you'll have a high unsubscribe rate at the start. So if this is something you're moving into and you see that, don't freak out. That's just because new things, people are like, what is this? I don't know what it is, unsubscribe. That levels itself out over time. But again, this information here, this little dashboard is such good information to have for effective communication. We look at every single email that goes out. We look at the metrics. We compare it to all metrics across the Nelson Institute. So we see what's working, what's not. Again, we can say this needs another. I just got a message saying we got low registration. So I'm going to go into that email that we sent, see who opened it but didn't click on it. And I'm going to send them a targeted email saying like, we saw that you were interested in this event, right? You've all gotten those. Are you still shopping for whatever in your cart? That's someone like me going through and using these metrics to better serve you and or get you to do what I want you to do. I could talk about this forever. So if anyone is listening and you're like, wait, this is cool, please reach out. Let's have coffee and let's talk about open rates.
And I would point out on that last slide, sorry, there are some other tabs too. This is just a static image from a web page that shows these statistics. There's other tabs there that you could be picking and looking at, things like click performance. There's something about content optimization. There's probably tips, feedback. The system is going to give you feedback on the email you sent to try to help you actually get better over time. I think that's what's neat about these as well, is they want everybody to perform as best as they can. And so it is over time too. I think that you're going to learn like, oh, and don't be bummed out if one of your emails doesn't perform as good as the one before it, but use it as a learning experience to figure out like, well, what exactly went wrong with that message that it didn't perform the way we thought it was going to, and just use that going forward. So this becomes sort of like your case history of your communications. It allows you to track progress over time. And that's a neat thing that really, when you were back in the old days of sending snail mail, we didn't have that. We didn't have a way to really know how things were changing over time. So it's another cool aspect of electronic communications.
A fun, hopefully fun, I think it's fun, anecdote for you all, that click performance. So if you go in there, that will show you like the ranking of the links in your email and what got the most clicks and what got the fewest. So thinking about how we were talking about newsletters and transitioning from PDF attachments to all of the information in the newsletter itself, that click performance in that email format, that newsletter format, is really going to tell you what works. If any of you are UW-Madison alumni, you may be familiar with their newsletter called The Flamingo, which goes out weekly. I was there before I was at Nelson, and when we were creating that newsletter, we did several months of digging into our click performance to see what stories consistently did best, what did the worst, and top three. And it was always people loved stories about animals. People loved stories about, I think it was like Babcock ice cream, and people loved like how to or news you can use. Like, here are 10 tips for planting a pollinator garden. And so then what we did for every issue after that is we made sure we had one story in each of those buckets because we knew that's what our people wanted. And we also knew that was going to improve our click rates and our performance, which is, what the boss people want to see too. So it worked out for everyone.
Yeah.
But if you do have a newsletter like that and you're like, okay, we've got our member profile, we've got our upcoming events, and we've got our fun fact, you can kind of rank those and see what are people actually interested in. And then you can just give them more of what they want, which is just going to build affinity for your organization too.
On this next slide, I feel like we're getting down to the bottom part of the F. Here's the information that maybe you want to read, maybe you don't care, but just some additional legalities to keep in mind. One of the reasons why we're talking about email is because lake districts have been around, local units of government, for almost 50 years. And only the last couple of years has the state law allowed them to substitute emails for official communications. So for the first, say, 49 years, you had to send paper copy mail of an annual meeting notice out to people. Now you can actually substitute if the person agrees that they want it. They have to opt in. So that also points you to a system like what Dave is talking about, where they opted in to getting this. They signed up for it. It's going to be tricky though. I'll warn you now, because you're going to have to manage. You're still going to have people getting snail mail, and you're going to have people getting electronic mail. And you have to make sure that both of them are getting this message sent to them on a regular basis, annually at least, for the annual meeting. You're also gonna have to check whether or not a property is sold or not. If somebody new is living there and you've got someone's old email address, that doesn't help you. So you got to make sure you're tracking things over time. And then Dave had pointed out previously that his lake association had to change their bylaws because they wanted to use email. Describe what that was like, Dave.
Yeah, absolutely. So when our bylaws were written, email wasn't a popular way of distributing information. We did snail mail. And so when we looked at the bylaws, it specifically said you have to use the US Postal Service to distribute information around our annual meeting. So we brought that to the board and to our membership and said, hey, we're a little bit beyond that. What if we try this out? And we tried it out, like I said before, without a service, and people were embracing it. We had some holdouts that were like, I really would prefer that to come via the mail. And that's fine. But over time, and it took probably 3 or 4 years, everybody that now gets regular communications from our organization is doing that via email and or our social media presence in Facebook and Instagram and places like that.
That's great. This is all about sort of modernizing how we do things and ideally becoming more efficient and cost effective over time as well. I think that pretty much wraps up our communications about emails. I want to thank again Dave and Chelsea for joining us. We are looking ahead to doing this again, and we've hinted at annual meetings a couple of times today. So what we want to do next time is take a little bit of a deeper dive into planning for successful annual meetings. These things aren't going to happen just by themselves. You do need to have sort of a strategy, and that includes notifying people about the date and the place and the time, and making sure those emails actually get to the people you want to send them to. But we're going to meet with some people who've been planning these meetings for a while and just get some insights and tips that can help you all. Sarah, did you have anything you want to add to close us out?
There was a lot in this recording, and we understand there is so much information, so much to dig into. It's really exciting though. So we will have the link to this recording in YouTube, as well as all the links to different resources we shared. We'll have those available in our YouTube description as well. And we have we'll have a checklist for you all to use too. So if you're like, where do I start? I need something to guide me through this. We'll have just a simple checklist so you can start down this email journey and figure out what's best for you and your organization. And definitely reach out to us as well to get some additional support get your questions answered. We're here to support you and help you. So thank you for joining us. Thank you, Dave and Chelsea, too, for joining us as well. And we look forward to working with everyone and seeing you all soon.